It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I know the anxiety that comes with watching a loved one struggle with a nonlinear path. This podcast was created to fight back against the narrow picture of success painted by social media. Each week, we share authentic stories from people who changed course, maybe failed, and ultimately found their own definition of success. These are the stories you need to hear to prove that changing your mind is common and you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. If you're a parent or you're a young adult looking for a little proof, you're home. Now let's get into today's episode. If you'd like to explore how I can help your young adult, you can schedule a free consultation through my website link in the show notes. Today, my guest is Clay Cross. Clay is the CEO and owner of Ascend Recovery in American Fork, Utah. His journey with Ascend started 14 years ago as a client fresh out of a wilderness therapy program, but his entire upbringing was the perfect catalyst for being a budding alcoholic. He has everything he could have ever wanted except for stability and a safe place to express his emotions. He was the typical black sheep of an East Coast conservative family that was outwardly perfect. Let's not wait any longer. Here's Clay. All right, Clay, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. I know like a little bit-ish of your story, but I'm actually just excited to sit down and have 30 minutes of undivided attention to kind of hear more about the actual journey leading to where it is that you are today. So let's walk it back. Where did you actually grow up? What was the messaging that you were getting about what you were supposed to be doing after high school? And if there's things that were going on outside of academics, fill us in.
For sure. Yeah. So I grew up outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. We lived in two different places, but the majority of my life there was in a small town called Ambler, Pennsylvania. It's about 30 minutes outside Center City, Philadelphia. You know, big piece of kind of my story that I always like to bring up, because I think it's a major impact, is my sister and I are both adopted. I was adopted at birth out of Fort Worth, Texas. From an adoption agency. And, really from kind of early age, my first cognitive memories were being adopted. My parents were very upfront about it. We had kids' books, all of those kinds of things that talked about it. So it was just something that I always knew. So I went to school in our neighborhood, in our town, for about the first 5 to 6 years of my schooling. And then from 7th grade through high school, I actually went to boarding school. I first went to school in Canaan, New Hampshire, which is a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere. That was 7th grade through 9th grade. And then from sophomore year through graduating high school, I went to school called Salisbury in Salisbury, Connecticut. So those years, it was a lot of time away from home, would come back for, Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring breaks, all of those kinds of things. My dad would come out for all of my football games and wrestling matches and all of that. So, we'd see each other a lot, but that was a pretty typical thing in our family. My mom, her brother, her sister all went to boarding school in New England. My cousins went to boarding school as well, but it was definitely different than the average person that I grew up around with. Some of the big pictures in my youth. So my mom is a high functioning alcoholic addict. She is an alcoholic and she loves cocaine. Some kind of like first memories of trauma really were the first time I saw anything was I was in 3rd grade. We were at a Kmart, which I don't think those even exist anymore. And she set off the security alarm, and I just kind of have these memories of being in this back room, and there was like this big white bag on the table of something, and I had no idea what it was. And the next thing I knew it, my mom was taken in a cop car, and my sister and I were taken in a different car and separated. And she had been arrested. She had 2 ounces of cocaine on her, and I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what the fuck cocaine was. I didn't know any of that stuff. And so I was, at the time, this was, back in Pennsylvania. I was in a K through 12 school. And I just remember being at recess, and there were, so there's a mixture of age of kids. And there were some of the older kids were, picking on me, and I guess they read in the newspaper about it, or the parents did, or people talk. And I just remember like calling my mom a crack whore and all of these things. And again, I didn't know what that was. It was just this kind of moment of panic and just sadness that I didn't know how to process or any of it. And I ran back to the classroom, and I had this teacher. Her name was Mrs. Hoffmaster, and she used to say "wash" when she would talk instead of "wash," which is a very Pennsylvania thing. And just I remember her giving me this huge like hug and like engulfing me. And it was also this moment in my life where it was kind of this first time that I felt like care and love from a person. So that was the first introduction in my life to the craziness that is addiction. And we didn't talk about it though either. She didn't go to jail, anything like that. She went to treatment, and I was told, mom is going away because she's sick. She's too skinny. She's all of those things. And, between that, and that was 3rd grade, between that and 6th grade, it continued to happen. She didn't get arrested, but she was in and out of treatments. In 6th grade, and I remember it because it was when we were doing DARE, which I thought was the dumbest thing in the world. Honestly, when they were talking about acid and all these things, I was like, that sounds awesome. That sounds cool. I want to try that. And that point, she went to treatment again. And that was the time when I guess I was deemed old enough to be told what was going on. So, my dad explained it to me and all these things. And, there were 2 things that he was very clear about. One was you don't tell your sister, and you never tell her. And she was 3 years younger than me. So I didn't. And then, we talked about it in the moment and then never talked about it again. And she went away. So she went to treatment, came back, and everything was fine, right? Like there was no issues. Mom and dad were happy, which is complete sarcasm. There was a constant struggle between them. There wasn't any violence in our family ever. There was a lot of just arguments and yelling at each other. And, as a 6th grader, and what must have been my early teens, I'm guessing, I was kind of thrust into this adult role of being mediator between my parents. On one side, I have this person who, is my mom, and is incredibly fun to be around at times, but extremely traumatic. And the amount of times where these, conversations of like, am I not enough for you to stop doing this, and all of those things. And my mom would just default to instantly crying and saying things like, well, I didn't even deserve to have children, and so I couldn't have children, and, running to her room and crying and drinking. And, with dad, I would express, and I didn't know how to express any of these feelings either, because there weren't emotions in our family. It was either happiness or anger, and that was it. And if it was anything else, it was always the like, oh, don't be so sensitive, or, why can't you be like this person, or any of that kind of stuff. And, so I would talk with my dad, and he would listen, and then he'd say, well, I can't deal with this. I can't, it's too much. I can't talk. So there's nowhere to talk about it, as a 6th grader, of having this rush of emotions and feeling like just shit. Right. Cause, I didn't know what the hell was going on, and I had nobody to talk to.
And my head goes to like, hold on, like, let me just throw this out there, because I'm like thinking about it. I'm also like piecing together the timeline too, because you're saying this is around the time too, or shortly after, now you're going off to boarding school. And so if you're at this place where you're like, dysfunction, that's what we'll call it, right? Like
Yeah.
we're not communicating, we're not being honest, like we're really compartmentalizing, there's a lot of secrecy, there's, just like weird dynamics at play, which clearly you've got a parent who is really struggling with substance use. And what we know about substance use is that in addition to it being addictive, so there's a biological component to it, we also know that it's at the core of it, there's a reason why we're drawn to numb or use. And so it really sounds like your mom has a lot of her own trauma and presenting issues that she probably had to work through. But I'm just like focusing on you. I'm like, oh my gosh, 6th grade Clay, who's getting ready to go off to boarding school for the next 6 years. This is how you probably stepped into boarding school going, this is how I communicate with other people, right? Like, this is normal. I'm either happy or I'm angry. I don't show anything else. We don't talk about it. Again, I'm kind of like, I'm envisioning this scenario. I'm curious if that's how it played out, or if there was an opportunity when you were in boarding school where all of a sudden we were talking about feelings, or we were getting real and honest about kind of, again, how you're quote unquote supposed to be when you have differing or conflicting emotions.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Like, I walked into boarding school and with that stuff going on and this inability to, it was either success, which is happiness, right? So you're only happy if you're succeeding, which whether that's school, winning football games, winning state tournaments in wrestling, those types of things, like that was success, right? And that was happiness. And that was the only way to achieve it. Everything else was, in hindsight now I can look at it and I'm like, well, it was sadness, it was hurt, it was all those things. But for me, it was just anger. It just came out purely as anger. I think boarding schools have come a long way now, especially in that kind of realm, the Northeast boarding schools. But it was not a place of like, hey, how are you feeling? How do we process this? It's like, take your medications, talk, to your advisor about school, go to, football practice, do these things, be a good boy, and you'll be happy and you'll succeed. And that might be, there was a lot of good things that did come out of boarding school. I can't, it wasn't all bad, but as far as like learning emotional development, maturity, there was zero of that.
Yeah. So, and I picture too, like, I imagine culturally being at, any of the boarding schools in New England, the culture there too is do well academically. So, and kind of to the vision that you're talking about, quote unquote, succeeding, it's like, well, now you're applying to colleges. Where are you going? Are you playing sports when you're in college? If not, like, it doesn't matter. It still matters where you're going. And so there's a lot of emphasis on that post-secondary education piece as a facade to like prestige, which leads into this vision of, again, a very narrow vision of what success looks like, which obviously we can expand upon that. But let's kind of segue to that point, because I want to make sure we still have time to talk about what it is that you're doing now. After you graduated from boarding school, where did life take you? Did you end up on that path, or kind of how did we get the winding path to where we are now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I did graduate very narrowly. I had gotten kicked out my sophomore year for smoking. I got suspended for smoking weed and then other drugs, and I was on drug testing. I got kicked out, went to Wilderness, ended up getting myself back in. I very narrowly graduated. I actually ended up doing post-grad year because shockingly, my academics were actually pretty good. My SATs, this was back in, I don't even think they do the SATs the same way anymore, but I was shit at standardized testing. I have pretty severe ADHD. If I'm not interested in something or it's mundane, I just completely check out. So I did a post-grad year. I ended up going to a small Division III school outside of Philadelphia called Ursinus College. It's in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. I made it a year and a half there before I was kicked out. Yeah. It was the first time in my life that I had freedom, really. Like, everything at boarding school is so regimented. You're up by this time, you have, breakfast, classes, lunch, all of it. Somehow still found a way to do copious amounts of drugs during that as well. But I apparently they didn't love it when you'd show up to 6 a.m. workouts for the football team drunk, or when you tried to fight the dean of students at a relay for life. So I ended up getting kicked out, all of that. I couldn't handle the freedom. I could not at all. So second time being kicked out of a school, second time having to have my dad pick me up and bring me home. I was not the success at all. Everybody else is on these quote unquote prestigious paths and all of that. And I had no interest in any of that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a stockbroker. I didn't want to be, everybody is like finance basically. I have no interest in that. It's zero.
Yeah.
So,
money. That's the vision. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you got kicked out, and I'm over here chuckling because I can just picture you like getting into a fight with the dean of students, which is comical, but also like, there's a natural consequence that is coming out of that. How did you go then from Pennsylvania? Like where did you go next?
Yeah. So, I went back, I moved in with my parents. I spent as much time as I really could until they were like, hey, you need to get your shit together and do something because this isn't working. And I was just like, fine, whatever. Like, I want allowance. I want money. I want whatever. I knew that they would never just kick me out of the house. They're not capable of boundaries like that. But I wanted, more money. So I was like, I'll do whatever. I enrolled in community college. I actually did really well. And then I got in a relationship and thought it'd be a great idea to follow this girl down to South Carolina. And I went to the University of South Carolina at that point. And that was, I would say in the 4 years that I was there, I probably went to school for maybe a year.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Which I feel like that in itself can probably be a separate conversation because there are probably like inner conversations or kind of micro stories, because I hear parents all the time in the situations where they're like, I thought I paid for my child and like I never knew that they weren't going to school or they failed or whatever. But again, that's a little sidebar conversation.
Yeah, I did have a pretty sweet, it was terrible now, right? But at the time I thought it was great. I had convinced my dad because they're up north, of essentially putting the money in my account so I could pay my tuition. And I didn't go to school, so I didn't pay tuition. So I had money for quite a while. Yeah, it was pretty awful. It was not proud of that, but that was, where my head was at the time.
Yeah. And that's, again, I think that, any parent that's listening to this, like now your wheels are spinning too, and understanding like how you got to find balance in wanting to give your young adult autonomy and trust. And then there's also an opportunity for, hey, if we also have had some of these recent experiences that tell us that maybe our child is not in a position to like be able to be trusted, maybe you need to kind of verify. And in that case, it's like, look, if you're going to be a student, I'll pay directly to the university rather than give you a bunch of money.
Yeah, don't give them the money. Don't give them the money.
Just
don't do it. Don't do it.
Mic drop. Okay, so like you said, not a proud moment, but you're not in South Carolina either, right? Like you're somewhere else. So how did we go from South Carolina? Like, where did we go?
A brief stint back in Florida with my family. I got to a point where, I had been using so heavily for so long that, I used in a way that would kill me, or I thought would, and it wouldn't. And I'd be super depressed that I was alive. And I had a moment where I was going to go through with it. And, for some reason I reached out to my dad and he showed up. And anyway, so I ended up back with them for a few months. We went and looked at a bunch of different treatment centers in Palm Beach and West Palm Beach. And because they lived a lot of the year down there as well. And I just remember at one point, and I said, if I'm going to do this, like it was a tiny moment of clarity. If I'm going to do this, like I need to get the fuck away from everything. I can't be near you guys. I can't be near people I know. I just need a full kind of change. And then I was like, I'd love to go back to wilderness therapy because I loved wilderness. So I went to wilderness therapy in Utah. And then, I thought I just needed that and I could drink like a gentleman and just not do drugs. But then I ended up at treatment out here in Utah at Ascend Recovery in 2012. And then I have been here ever since then, 14 years later.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
and just for like a spotlight, you're talking about being a participant 14 years later. Now, what's your role with Ascend?
Now I am the owner and CEO of Ascend Recovery.
Okay.
So I have been a part for about 14 years. I've worked here for, in between two different stints of working here for at least a decade. And almost 2 years ago, Brian Salter, the founder and owner of Ascend, wanted to go back to just being a therapist. And we talked about the changing things and me buying Ascend from him. And it is not anything in my life I ever thought that I would be doing. I never thought I would live in Utah, first of all. I thought that was just this crazy place where really, really religious people lived and weird things happened. And yeah, so it's been almost 2 years since I took over.
I feel like, hold on though, you can't drop that and then not elaborate on it, because you're still there. Obviously, Utah is not that. For anybody that's listening, if you don't know Clay, he's got a great sense of humor and also like just like the perfect poker face. Because sometimes you're like, "Are you being serious?" Like I'm questioning. Yeah, like okay, that was
sorry. My wife tells me that all the time. I do it. I've been with her for so long and I still can pull one over on her. But Utah is not a weird place. Yes, there are religious people here. There's religious people everywhere. But Utah, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like an Austin in the sense that it's in this, state that's very particular in a certain way. But then, Salt Lake, it's got one of the most diverse kind of groups of people I've seen, even coming from the East Coast, as far as, race, religion, sexual preferences, everything. It's probably because a large portion of us are all transplants that ended up living here. But it is the one place in my life that I felt home. Like truly like accepted, a part of something, whether it's because of my addictions, whether it's because of being adopted, whether it's whatever reason, my whole life, I didn't feel like I fit anywhere. Didn't matter if it was shown to me, I just didn't fit. And it's the first place that I got to create something on my own, as far as the people I'm with, all of that. And yeah, I would never leave, ever. I love it. I would never try and tell someone they need to live here forever, but I think giving this place a try for a year, however you end up here and for whatever reason, I think the community that we have, recovery community, and not just recovery, but the community to support mental health, gender identity, sexual preferences, all of that, it is amazing. So I hope that can do away with my poker face previously.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like the state of Utah is probably going to take that clip too and use that as like a marketing like ploy to get like, hey, we aren't what people think we are. And even if the state, swings red in like years of voting, it doesn't matter, because there's a lot going on. And actually, I appreciate you saying that, jokes aside, because I lived in Colorado myself for 7 years, and I always remember there just being such, mixed perceptions about Utah, even for folks that are in Colorado. And it's like, actually, when you think about somebody that's moving out west and they're like, oh, I'm moving to Colorado to like be in the mountains. I'm like, if you want to be in the mountains, move to Utah, right? Like you can literally be like skiing within 30 minutes. Whereas depending on if you're in Denver or, like Fort Collins, God forbid, it's going to be 2.5 hours before you actually get on the slope. So anyways, that's clearly like one little blip of information, but I love that you named too that it was the first place that really felt like home, and this was not what you expected. And the fact that it really does feel very full circle of like going there for recovery for yourself, for treatment, now to being not just an employee, but an owner and CEO. Okay, so I feel like I have to ask you this loaded question. Having heard your whole journey up to this point, do you see yourself as successful?
I do. And there's a lot of ways that I think there's a lot of ways that we can all define success, right? And I could say I'm successful because I've reached the quote unquote pinnacle of my career, or I'm successful because during the 13-ish years of working in recovery, I've been a part of helping people change their lives. But for me, my personal success is that I would define as that, every morning I don't wake up and I'm like, this is amazing. I'm so happy. right? That's bullshit. I used to think that's what it would be like, and it's just not. But I don't wake up and wish I was dead anymore. Like, I just don't, right? I don't wake up and then immediately think of ways that I can burn my life to the ground because I'm scared, right? That was why I always did it. I wanted to run away. I wanted to burn every relationship I had to the ground, because if I do that, then I understand if you leave me. But if I'm worried about you leaving me, it's going to tear me apart. And that's something that, is not happening. Like, of course I get scared. I get worried. My wife's going to get tired of my bullshit and leave me all the time. But again, I would define success as that I found somebody that still loves me for my bullshit and understands me, and I can have those relationships, right? And to me, that's success. And another kind of example, just in my story, is my dad died actually 2 weeks after I closed on Ascend. He'd been pretty sick, and but we had 13 years of a relationship I never imagined possible. And it wasn't just me who changed. My dad changed, and that, my mom won't change ever, which is fine. I've made peace with that, and I have a healthy relationship that protects me. But I was able to do that with my dad, and he was able to see me start a family of my own, to have a child, to take care of him, to be a good father, a good husband, and a good friend, and then to do something different than anybody else does, right? Like, I didn't chase finance. I didn't chase these, massive, successful, high earning jobs. I just wanted to be around like-minded people and try and help people, right? And that's success for me, at least.
Okay. So we are quickly wrapping up and closing out on time. And I really feel like this, I wish if I had a magic wand, we would have more time to talk. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to do a little bit of a call to action for anybody that's listening, because one of the things that I actually would have loved to have asked you, and so I'm just going to punt this out there, but it's more for like the listeners to actually circle back to you and ask for your answer, which is, obviously you work, Ascend is a treatment program for adults 18 and up. You tend to have kind of a mixed range of community, but I mean, I've referred to you all before. I have young adults that are alumni of Ascend. So if you, and this is for you, Clay, if you could give a piece of advice to a parent that is kind of struggling, maybe similarly dealing with a like younger version of Clay, right? Like, and they feel like they're doing all the things. And if there's any piece of advice that you can give that you hadn't given during your story, like what would that piece be? So my call to action for any parent that's listening, we've got Clay's contact will be in the show notes, as well as just like go check out Ascend. It is a fantastic program, but connect with him, ask this question. And Clay, thank you for taking time to be a guest.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you stopped me. I would have talked for 5 hours. So,
well, and I feel like we probably could have like made it even more comical throughout. But again, we'll leave people wanting more.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great seeing you.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guest for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email joanna@lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.